Good morning. Welcome. So we are continuing in our series, Travel Light. And this passage, prior to this passage, is one of the most important, one of the most pivotal events in the nation of Israel. Just before this passage is the Exodus. It's that moment where God reached down and he saved his people. He saved them out of Egypt. He saved them out of slavery. And then after that, God, he splits the waters. And he allows the people to walk through on dry land, and then of course those pursuing them get washed out. And it's right after that we come to our passage here in Exodus 15, verses 22 to 24, that says, "Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, 'What are we to drink?'" And you need to appreciate the play on words that's happening here. Because, you see, the name Marah actually translates, it actually means bitter or bitterness. So it would be fair to reread this passage, at least starting at verse 23, it'd be fair to read it this way. When they came to bitterness, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called bitter. So the people grumbled, or you could say, became bitter against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink? What are we to drink?" So, if you would, with me this morning, I would like us to camp at Marah as we look at this topic of bitterness. It's interesting how these things work out sometimes. Scott did not plan it this way. I did not plan it this way. I mean, today I'm preaching on bitterness, and my last sermon here, which was in a completely different sermon series, was on anger. I don't know, God, or if it's just coincidence, but it's just funny how that works out, and and today it's on bitterness, and so let's just take a moment just to review some of the things that I spoke on about 4 weeks ago or something like that. So anger. What did we learn? We learned that it is okay to be angry, right? It's not a sin. In fact, Jesus became angry at times. We learned that, right? We also learned that if you're going to buy a house, get pre-approved first, right? We also learned that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go on YouTube. The sermon's there. Anyways, however, we do have to be careful that in our anger, we're not led into sin, right? That there's a righteous anger, right? That anger that comes, we saw it in Jesus when we're recognizing wrongdoings that are being done against other people. And then there's that more sort of self-centered anger, an anger that comes when we're not getting what we want. And we looked at the Apostle Paul and what he had to say about anger, but then we looked to David, right? David in the Psalms, where he encouraged us to deal with our anger not by ignoring it, but by meditating on it, by becoming more aware of it. And in doing so, that there we could calm ourselves. So today we're looking at bitterness. And as I said, bitterness is very similar to anger. In fact, I would argue it's really kind of a variation on anger. When we look at Ephesians chapter 4:31, it says, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. And here, the Apostle Paul is kind of lumping these things together. Getting rid of bitterness, rage, anger. I was serving these two clients in a group home. And these two clients, one was very angry, like had a very explosive anger. He was big, he was loud, and his emotions, they seemed to change just at the drop of a hat sometimes. And this other client, very different. He was much more quiet, very quiet at times, a lot smaller. And I was explaining to a newer worker, a co-worker of mine, a friend of mine, I said to him, listen, it's this quiet client that you really do need to be careful with. And my coworker is kind of looking at me and kind of like he's having a hard time believing me. He really is. He really is. I mean, the quiet one, like sometimes he barely spoke above a whisper, and he was so accommodating. And while yes, all of that was true, I said, yeah, but the thing is with the louder one, yes, he seemed to get angry more frequently, but you knew what was coming. You know that expression that, he wears his emotions on his sleeve. And essentially that was it. If you wanted to know what he was feeling, you didn't need to wonder. It was right there. It was right there on his sleeves. You could tell. But that wasn't the case with the quieter client. And the day came where that coworker came to me and he said to me, Scott, you were right. And he then proceeded to tell me this story of how one day he was working on the floor. And in this unit, he worked solo. There was another unit beside it, but in this particular one, you worked solo. And he was working there, and he had obviously done something or said something or not done something that had upset this client, this quiet client. He's not sure what it was, or if he was, he didn't realize that it had upset him to such a degree. When all of a sudden, this client jumped him. Like, from behind. He jumped him. He started hitting him. And my friend had to sort of kind of wrestle him off and get away, and he got up and he ran. Like, he ran to the front door. This front door that was always left unlocked. Always left unlocked. He ran to the door, and he grabbed the handle. As he grabbed the handle to open the door, it was locked. It was locked. And the time it took him to reach for the lock, that client had caught up to him and jumped on him again. And they fell to the ground, and there was some wrestling, and they had to get the client off of him, and he got up and unlocked that door and get out the door. Who had locked the door? It was that client. He thought ahead. Now that never would have happened with the louder, more explosive client. Right? When he becomes angry, you're like, it just, boom, it just comes out. But with that quieter client, he was more cunning. He strategized more. And I'm not here to say that one is better than the other. It's just interesting how anger can get expressed differently at times. When we think of anger, I think we oftentimes think of that explosive anger. And that's what I talked about in my last sermon, right? That type of anger, that lack of emotional regulation. But bitterness is a type of anger that simmers. It lingers longer. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 says, "See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." No bitter root. Notice the analogy that's used here. The analogy is not that, that the anger that drops like an acorn. Right? It's not instant. A bitter root. It takes time for a root to grow. It's not instant. And the health of the root will determine the health of the plant. The sickness of root will determine the sickness of the plant. And so today, as we look at bitterness, I'd like to consider two questions that I would like us to look at. I guess I could have picked three. I guess the first question I could have asked was, do we want to be bitter? I decided we don't really need to discuss that question. I think we all have the same answer. I don't think we need to go over, do we want to? That's a clear no. Okay? So we're going to go straight to the next two questions. The questions are this. One is, how do we prevent bitterness? How do we prevent it? And then the second question is how do we combat it? Preventing bitterness. Romans 12, verses 17 to 19 says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friend, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. And so I think preventing bitterness has something to do with leaving it in God's hands. Consider Jesus as he was nearing the time of his arrest, and he was heading up to the garden in Gethsemane. He was heading there with some of his closest friends, some of his closest disciples, and as they got to the garden, he said to them, listen, I want you guys to pray for me. And he asked them to, to sit down or kneel down and to keep him in their prayers as he would go a little bit further on. And as he goes further on, Matthew 26:39, going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet, not as I will, but as you will. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Jesus accepted the situation, even if it meant dying on a cross. He accepted God's sovereignty. Did he want to die on a cross? No. No. Acceptance is not agreeing to like something, but it's accepting that it is what it is. Jesus accepted it. June 8th, 1972, there was a napalm bomb released on the village of Trang Bang, South Vietnam. Phan Thai Kim Phuc, and I'm sorry if I'm mangling that name, she was 9 years old at the time. She received third-degree burns as her clothes, the ones that she was wearing, were burned up. She was captured in this photograph, running naked. And in her native language, she was crying the words, too hot, too hot. Some of her family members died. She was not expected to survive. She was taken to hospital. And over the next 14 months, she received 17 surgical operations before she could return home. It would not be for another 10 more years before she could properly move again. Now, I think you can understand quite reasonably how someone going through such trauma could hold on to a great deal of bitterness. And in fact, many of those who hold on to bitterness, many of us who hold on to bitterness, do so for a very good reason. But that was not the case with Kim Phuc. Kim Phuc was later made a Goodwill Ambassador for UNESCO. And in 1996, she gave a speech at the Veterans Day observance in Washington where she said, "We cannot change history, but we should try to do good things for the present." We cannot change history, but we should try to do good things for the present. She didn't condone the actions that happened back in 1972, but she accepted them. She came to a place where she was able to accept the past. It happened, and in that acceptance, to better move forward. Hebrews chapter 12, I previously read verse 15 that says, "See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." But then as we read on, it then says, "See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless, like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit his blessing, he was rejected, even though he sought the blessing with tears. He could not change what he had done." And here we see this stark contrast between Kim Phuc, who could not change the past, but had come to this place where she could accept the past and say we need to do good things anyway. And Esau, who just couldn't accept the past, couldn't accept what he had done or what had been done to him. And in tears, he tries to regain that blessing that he can't. If we want to prevent bitterness, then I think the key is acceptance. Not agreeing to what has happened to you, been done to you, but accepting, coming to that place where you can accept that it's done, it's over, it's time to move forward. And it would be nice if I could end the sermon here. It would be nice if I could say, great, now we are all going to walk forward in that mode of acceptance. And good day. See you later. But the reality is we are human. And as much as that it would be nice, there are going to be times where that bitterness does take root in our hearts, where it is really hard to walk in acceptance. And that leads to the second question of how do we combat bitterness when it does take root in us? And as we look at the second question, I'd like to continue with the story of Esau. So let's look back at Esau's story. Esau was the firstborn. He was entitled as the firstborn to a majority of the inheritance, probably about 2/3. Jacob was the younger of the twin brothers, and he was cunning. And with the help of his mother, who liked Jacob more than Esau, he stole his brother's birthright by tricking his father. And then as Esau finds this out, in Genesis 27:34, when Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me, me too, my father." And then skipping down to verse 41, Esau held a grudge against Jacob. He became bitter against his brother. He held a grudge because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Now, notice that. The days of my mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. That's a bitter anger. Right? That is not an explosive anger. An explosive anger says, everyone clear the way. I am going right now to kill my brother. Right? That's not what this is. This is, I really don't like my brother. I really want him dead. But maybe not right now. My father's getting old. I have some things to do here. Then he's going to die. Then I'm going to need to mourn a little bit. And then maybe sometime after that, when the time is right, maybe then I'll go ahead and I'll seek out my brother. Again, I'm not arguing that one is somehow better than the other. It's just to know that there's a bitterness there. So Jacob flees, the younger brother. He goes to live with his uncle Laban. And 5 chapters later, many years later, have passed, and there comes a point where Jacob needs to return to his homeland. He needs to return to his brother. And we see how he is preparing for this meeting in Genesis 32:5, where he says, I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my Lord, and just where it says my Lord, in this case, it's not referring to God, it's referring to his brother, to Esau. Now I am sending this message to my Lord, that I may find favor in your eyes. And then we come to the actual meeting. In Genesis 33, 4-11, but Esau killed his brother? No. No. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. Who are these with you? He asked. Jacob answered, they are the children God has graciously given your servant. Then the female servants and the children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, what is the meaning of all these flocks and herds I met? To find favor in your eyes, my Lord, he said. But Esau said, I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. No, please, said Jacob, if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Now that you have received me favorably, please accept this present that was brought to you. For God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need. And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. What just happened? What just happened? From the brother who stole the blessing to the brother who wanted to kill the other brother to what just happened? Forgiveness. Forgiveness. Jacob sought it. Esau gave it. There's an article I was reading in Psychology Today, and the article itself wasn't a very deep, in-depth research type of article, but the author of this article had done a lot of research on the topic of bitterness, looking at other research studies and other articles, and he summarizes when he says, virtually every writer who has weighed in on the subject of bitterness has discussed its ultimate remedy, forgiveness. Forgiveness alone enables you to let go of grievances, grudges, rancor, and resentment. It's the single most potent antidote for the venomous desire for retributive justice poisoning your system. Forgiveness. And in 1996, Kim Phuc gave that speech at the Veterans Day observance in Washington, where she said, we cannot change history, but we should try to do good things for the present. It was after that speech that she was approached by a veteran who said that he believed that he was the one to order that airstrike. In 1997, she became a Canadian citizen. In fact, she lives just outside of Toronto. During a 2008 interview on NPR radio, Kim Fook said, "Forgiveness made me free from hatred. I still have many scars on my body and severe pain most days, but my heart is cleansed." Napalm is very powerful, but faith, forgiveness, and love are much more powerful. We would not have war at all if everyone could learn how to live with true love, hope, and forgiveness. If that little girl in the picture can do it, ask yourself, can you? And the question she asks there, maybe we could ask of ourselves, if that little girl in the picture can do it, can you? Ephesians chapter 4, I read 31, where it said, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice." But then if we continue on, it then says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another." And how do we do that? Forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. I believe that the biggest antidote to becoming bitter is acceptance. But once bitterness has taken root in our hearts, at that point, the greatest antidote is forgiveness. Forgiveness. So let us go back to where we began. Let us go back to Mara. And I previously read Exodus 15, verses 22 to 24. We'll pick it up in verse 23. I'll go a little bit further this time. When they came to Mara, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Mara. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it in the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made a decree and a law for them, and there he tested them. He said, "If you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord who heals you." And in verse 27, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. They came to Elim. Springs and palm trees. And the people went from Mara to Elim. And the people went from bitterness to the oasis of God's provisions. And how did that happen? Well, for one thing, what did God ask of them? Much like we discussed earlier on, acceptance. He asked them to show acceptance by accepting his commands. And the other thing that we see here is that they cried out through Moses. They cried out to them. If we want to prevent bitterness, acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean you condone or agree with what has happened. But as Christians, it says that we recognize that when wrongs have been done, that we leave that in God's hands. That taking justice or taking revenge is not in our hands. We leave that to him. That's what acceptance is. But there are going to be times where bitterness does take root. And for very good reasons. And as I've been talking today, maybe some of you have been reflecting on maybe some bitterness in your own heart. And maybe you would say to me, yeah, but Scott, you don't understand how badly I have been hurt. You don't understand what my mother said to me, what my child said to me. You don't know what my brother did to me or my sister. You don't know how I've been treated at work and how that person stabbed me in the back. I've been stolen from. You don't understand, Scott. I've been abused. I've been raped. I've been hurt. You're right. I don't know your story. And I don't know how hard it's been for you. What I do know is it is those who hold on to resentment, they usually do so for very good reason. But I also know that holding on to it isn't helping you. And once it's taken root, the greatest antidote is forgiveness. It's forgiveness. And when it seems so hard to fathom that I could ever go from Mara to Elam, that I could ever go from that bitterness to the oasis of God's provisions, and the people of the Lord cried out to God through Moses. They cried out, help us. Help us. And as I've been speaking today, if maybe you have been thinking about an area of your life that you are holding on to some bitterness, I would encourage you now to close your eyes. I'll ask everyone, close your eyes, bow your heads. And maybe you would make this your prayer. Maybe you would say, Dear God, I really don't want to forgive that person. But I also don't want to hold on to this bitterness. Help me. And I would challenge you to make that your prayer and to pray that prayer each day this week. Amen. Amen. Thank you. We're going to shift to an opportunity for giving. And I'm going to call those who are on baskets today to bring them around. Of course, the first set is where you take out what you need to for pens. And the second set, you get to return everything. And as that happens, I'm going to ask that there's a video that's going to be queued up, and we can play that video as you're giving.
玉娇龙离家出走，听说鲁爷入洞房的时候，新娘子不见了。玉父想探贝勒爷个信儿，是不是愿意帮助找一下？说是贝勒爷江湖上认识人多，传个话出去，一是容易找到，二是别出什么事儿。
贝勒爷，这事就交给我们，不劳你费心。
伺候点什么？怎么这么早？
打扰了。看分 尊姓大名，怎么称呼啊？
姓龙，
原来是龙少侠。失敬失敬，在下冀东铁鹰爪宋明。这位是我师哥飞天豹李云。不知道龙少侠途经淮安要到哪儿去啊？
哪儿好玩去哪儿。
人生地不熟，我们哥俩帮你调查调查地面。
用不着你们操心。
这位是真不懂，是假不懂啊？
不懂怎么着？
不懂，有不懂的规矩。
看看少侠跟武当派的李慕白是。
手下败将。
Anyways, we do have just a few minutes. If there are any questions or comments on any of the passages that I spoke on bitterness in general. Yeah. Dougie.
Sorry, I'm just wondering. So I totally, absolutely am convinced that your antidote to bitterness, once it sets in, is forgiveness. And I'm just wondering, really, though, to prevent it, is really acceptance enough, or do we actually need forgiveness to prevent it from setting in the first place?
Yeah, that could be argued that as well. I guess the thought is that if you are truly in that sort of acceptance mode, and it doesn't kind of resonate with you, you might not actually need to forgive because you haven't been hurt. But I wouldn't quibble. I mean, we're kind of splitting hairs at that point. I mean, obviously both are important. You know, somebody could say something really nasty to me. And if I truly am embracing this idea of acceptance, I don't get hurt by that at all. When they say it, my initial thought is, wow, this person must be really suffering. They're really struggling. I feel really bad for them. And if that's the case, I don't know that I actually need to forgive them in the sense that it hasn't hurt me, right? On the other hand, if they say something really nasty to me and I'm like, ouch, I don't like that. I don't like this person. I hope they trip and fall, right? Then I haven't really been able to accept, right? And then at that point, that's where I feel, it's that bitterness has started to take root, and there is where I need to exercise forgiveness. But I mean, I wouldn't quibble. Forgiveness is always a good answer. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much. And sorry. Yes. Kristen. Yes.
Sometimes forgiveness is a process and has to happen repeatedly over a period of time. Yep. But if that's the case, is there a point where you don't have to revisit that and you're just free from it all, or is it always going to be sort of a process?
I like your comment. I see it more as a comment than a question, because I agree with you. It is oftentimes it is a process, and not always. I mean, there's sometimes when you are able to forgive someone and feel that release, and it's done. But you're right. I mean, there's sometimes where it is hard. It is a process, and you kind of forgive someone of that debt, and then you pick that emotional debt back up, and then you have to release it again. And do you ever get to that place where it's completely gone? Absolutely, you do, and that's called glory. And that's called glory. I mean, it depends on the person and on the debt, of course. But some people, it is an ongoing process for the rest of their lives. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else before I sit down? All right. Thank you.
Why don't you stand and sing with me?